Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, Yamamoto signs with the Dodgers, leaving the biggest question, what's next for the Mets? Joe and I go through all of the options, including the impact this has, not only now, but next offseason as well. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcast, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV, from inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And here's your reminder to subscribe to our show at Apple Podcast, Spotify. You can watch all the episodes on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And I just want to say this right off the top here. If you're angry about Yoshinobu Yamamoto going to the Dodgers, take out your anger on the keyboard. Go to sportspodcastawards.com and smash those vote buttons for the Mets Pod in our categories of Best Baseball Podcast and Best Team Podcast. We will give you Yamamoto therapy and make you feel better about the Mets by the time you're done listening to today's show. All we ask in return is your vote so we could take home at least one of these awards. These awards are all up to you, and we appreciate it so much. All right, Joe, let's get right into it. This is a special episode, a disappointing one. When we do emergency podcasts, I feel like every time it's been about the Mets making a big splash, making a big move. We've done it, obviously, with Verlander. We've done it a lot over the years. Lindor, on and on it goes. This is one where it's unique that the Mets offseason was so tunnel vision focused on one player, and they didn't get him. Now, at a minimum, I guess if you're looking for some kind of, I won't say glass half full, but something positive, they won't be watching him pitch across town, and Yankees fans will rub it in your face either. But he stays in the National League and goes to the Dodgers that are clearly trying to build a super team. So I just want your, opinion on this right out of the gate. When it came down that it was official, I don't think anyone was shocked, especially after the structure of the Ohtani deal came out, that so much money was deferred and the Dodgers were going to be big-time players and had a massive hole in their rotation as is. But I don't think it makes this any easier to take in as soon as the news drops.
Mets fans are disappointed today, and I entirely get it. I'm disappointed. Connor, I don't want to speak for you, but I assume
I'm disappointed.
You're a little disappointed. Yeah. I mean,
not devastated, though.
Right. It's tough to make me devastated when it comes to a baseball move, too. I can kind of see a silver lining in about anything. But this is a guy that, like you said on this past week's show, we've been talking about Yamamoto since like July. So this has been a long time coming. And I told people on air, off air, I felt confidence that the Mets would end up with Yoshinobu Yamamoto. And that was kind of my brain saying, Steve Cohen pulled out all the stops. We talked about it ad nauseum. He flew to Japan. He had Yamamoto at his house for a meeting. He made the highest offer. Yes, the Dodgers came in and matched. But from everything that we're reading and hearing after the fact, and maybe more details are still to come, what it sounds as if is the Mets came in heavy at $325 million, which is the biggest contract ever for a pure pitcher in the history of the sport. And I think fans right now are kind of just scoffing at that as if that means absolutely nothing. It was an aggressive attempt. And what it came down to, nuts and bolts, he wanted to be a Dodger. And they took the Mets offer to the Dodgers and probably said to them, if you match this, he's coming your way. He's going to be a Dodger. It didn't sound as if Steve Cohen really had a chance to up the bid, because I think that's a thing we had said on the show, and I've heard fans talk about over the last 12 hours or so, that the Mets should have outbid the competition by $40 million, $50 million. It doesn't sound like they had that opportunity here.
Yeah, Joe, I like that you brought up, the reality is the Mets did what they could, and I think this is being kind of misconstrued as people are surprised Steve Cohen didn't blow everyone out of the water, right? It wasn't a $400 million, $450 million. And there's a lot we don't know here. I think what we can take away is that Yamamoto didn't want to be a Met, right? Like sometimes you have to just get down to the toughest thing to accept, right? That's really what it is. You almost go into a denial of, well, why wouldn't he want to be a Met? They'll pay him the most. It's New York. He could pitch with Senga. Yeah, there's a lot of great things here. And I thought this would be a great spot for Yamamoto. I also understood that I think I underestimated the power of Ohtani, number one. I never underestimated the power of the Dodgers' financial muscle. I mean, this is a team that look at the money they've spent for a long time now and what they will do in free agency. The Yankees, I always wondered if they would go to a higher than Garrett Cole offer. I really doubted that. And I thought that would really hurt them unless he was just obsessed with being a Yankee. And clearly he wasn't. He wasn't, because the financial difference isn't overly jarring. But I think at the end of the day, this hit a point that they weren't just going to keep going back and forth, where the agent, who reps plenty of Mets, by the way, and there's a relationship here that matters, was going to go, okay, Mets, how about they match 325? How about 350? Oh, the Dodgers match 350. How about, like, I think that's what people are looking for here that are disappointed. And in my opinion, Joe, I don't think that's what existed here. I think at the end of the day, after all of these meetings, he wanted to be a Dodger as long as the money was right. And he got exactly what he wanted. And yes, the Mets were used to an extent. No one is denying that. But it didn't even go further than it could have. He just didn't want to be a Met. And sometimes in free agency and all of sports, that is how the cookie crumbles, as much as it can suck to accept that.
And you have to realize this is going to happen from time to time. When you have the richest owner in the sport, there's going to be times that free agents really want your money. And there's going to be times when free agents really want to use your money to get money somewhere else. It is bound to happen. And yeah, and that has to be an accepted reality, which frankly, it's a better reality than we've lived for most of our lives, where a lot of times our big offseason moves were, you know, a back end starter or a middle reliever. And it was just like hope and pray. The Mets are clearly invested. You know, I'm not trying to shill here, but look, Steve Cohen offered $325 million. And with the posting fee, it comes out to north of $375 million. He wanted this guy. It just didn't happen. He didn't want to be a Met. And now where you reside is you have to move on because you have to still build out a 2024 roster. I imagine David Stearns is a guy that had a backup plan in mind. And, you know, we could get to some of those things, but he knew this was a possibility. You and I knew this was a possibility. Maybe we held like a little blind hope and faith a bit. But look, like you said, Connor, he wanted to be a Dodger. He didn't want to be a Met. Maybe he would have been a Met if the Dodgers didn't come close to the dollar amount. We'll never know because they did. And he's there. And, you know, the allure of a team that already had won 100 games last year, added Ohtani, and gave him, you know, the money amount to make him feel special. That's a hard thing to overcome.
It is a nearly impossible one. I want to, before we go to the what's next, right, Joe? Because that's really the big reason we're doing this podcast today is what is next? That's what every Mets fan wants to know. They want to find some hope. They want to find some answers. Do you think him going to the Dodgers instead of the Yankees in all of this and not the Mets enhances the Mets' chances at getting Juan Soto a year from now or hurts the Mets' chances? Because I think I could see the side that is, okay, now the Yankees don't have another $30+ million on the books in a year next year where Garrett Cole can also opt out. And if they lost Soto to free agency, they could be like, well, we got Yamamoto last year. We have a lot of money invested in this team still. Or there's the side of it too right now that Steve Cohen missed out on Yamamoto, somebody that he really, really wanted. It would have been the splash of this city right now. And that there's no price limit for Soto because as great as we think Yamamoto will be, and he's 25, and the power of having a Japanese star in terms of marketing and fans and all of these things, Juan Soto has had success in the big leagues for a very long time. He is as sure of a sure thing that a 26-year-old free agent will ever be. So I just wanted your quick 2 cents on the look ahead to next year before we really get into this next month.
I think over the next month, let's see what the Yankees do. Do the Yankees pivot to a Jordan Montgomery and expensive, like how do they get over the loss of Yamamoto. I think that's a factor. And look, if Steve Cohen really wants Juan Soto to me, unlike someone like Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who was coming from another country and adjusting to where he wanted to spend the next 12 years or whatever of his career, Juan Soto almost certainly is going to the highest bidder. So I don't think the Yankee pinstripes are going to get them much of a discount. And if I were the Yankees, I would be a little nervous that next winter Steve Cohen's going to be coming with the bag for Juan Soto.
Yeah, we will be. And I know we're already talking ourselves into the next big free agent, but we will do it again, folks. We will absolutely be here and we will do it again. All right, let's get into the now, because this is what really matters. And I think the opinions, I'll say this, the majority, what I sense, whether it's Mets fans with a giant platform, whether it's just the Mets fans that we talk to during our mailbag segments every single week, the majority of Mets fans right now, Joe, I think, are kind of more invested on being careful this offseason and then putting their foot on the gas literally down to the floor for 2025. And while I'm not going to sit here and lie to anyone and say that you can go all in this year and still accomplish all your dreams the following year, I think, Joe, there is a world where the Mets make some important moves right now, because it always goes back to the cash power of Cohen. And we're pretty easy on this ownership and David Stearns right now, because number one, Steve Cohen spends money and Steve Cohen cares, and the Mets have improved a lot since the team has been sold. And I think those are all really that's just being honest. And we believe in David Stearns right now. But this next month or two, I really want to see the Mets devour the 1-year market, or the what I like to call risk-free market. It's expensive, right? Like, can you go out there and get a DH, but it's going to cost you $20 million? I don't care that it's $20 million and it might not work. At the end of the day, after this year, off the books, doesn't matter. Can you get Lucas Giolito to come here and try to rebuild his value to the pitcher he used to be? And will he do it on a 1-year, $22 million deal? Will he do it on a 2-year deal, but really the second year has that player opt out with the buyout? That's very favorable to him, and he can reestablish himself on the market. What is next to you, Joe? It can be Jordan Montgomery. It could be Blake Snell. I'm not telling you how to operate, and you know how much I like Jordan Montgomery more than the average Met fan. But I really think the Mets can make competitive moves now that does not impact their long-term future at all.
I'll preface this with Steve Cohen could wake up one day in 3 weeks and decide, I want Blake Snell or I want Jordan Montgomery or whatever, 2 weeks from now, whatever the time frame is. He could just wake up one day and decide, I want him, and go get him. That is obviously going to be within the realm of possibility at any time. I mean, the Carlos Correa thing came from nowhere, right? So we could obviously go back to that. But I think being pragmatic is the right thing right now. To your point, that doesn't mean Adrian Hauser is going to be the best starting pitcher that they add. They're going to add another starting pitcher. They were pursuing Yamamoto, and Lucas Giolito probably tops my list because I think he brings the best blend of floor and ceiling. Like, he has the potential to pitch to a 3.4, 3.5 ERA, but the floor is that he's going to take the ball every time. He consistently makes every single start. So he's a good blend. If you could get him on a 1-year or a 2-year with an opt-out, that's an optimal pitcher to add to the rotation for me personally. Otherwise, you can operate in a similar tier. Like a Mike Clevenger is someone that might take a short-term deal that has some potential. Hyun-Jin Ryu from Toronto is another one that I've read about. And you know what I do want to see? Brandon Woodruff. As long as your medical team says we think Brandon Woodruff will be fine in 2025, I would sign him today, tomorrow. I would sign him right away, and that's a piece that you could focus on for 2025. But to stay on 24, you still probably need a outfielder /DH or a third baseman /DH. You certainly need a DH. It's just a matter of what pool do you pick from? Do you pick a Justin Turner as someone to be, insurance for Brett Beatty? Do you pick a Jorge Soler? Do you pick a Jock Peterson? someone that can be, insurance in the outfield while you wait for Drew Gilbert or Luis Angel Acuna to make their way up and maybe be an outfielder for the 2024 Mets. And then, of course, you have to add to the bullpen. That goes without saying. But that market is so flush with options that you could sign for 1 or 2 years. You think of David Robertson, you think of Ryan Stanek, you think of Phil Maton. The list is long, Matt Moore, of relievers that can make an impact on this team. Let us not forget, I know 2023 didn't go well at all for the Mets. I mean, we were here for it with you guys. At the end of the day, the year before, they won 101 games. And a lot of that core on the offensive side, at least, is still intact. This is not an untalented team. This is not a team that is incapable with some savvy moves, which, we'll save the Adrian Hauser and Tyrone Taylor talk for maybe another show. But savvy moves is something that can put you right in the range of 84 to 86 wins. And as we saw this year with the Arizona Diamondbacks, just try to get in the dance. And if you're competitive come July, the Mets will have the prospect capital to add to the roster at the trade deadline if they want. So while it's stinky today that they didn't get the ace that we all wanted, I think you should feel pretty comfortable that the Mets are not giving up on 2024.
No way. And I think, you bring up a great point about Giolito. At a minimum, he takes the ball, okay? He's had at least 29 starts every season since 2018, obviously discounting 2020, which was the shortened season, which he still made 12 starts. So this is a dude that you almost pencil him in for 30 starts, and he's got to be motivated to get back to being a higher-end pitcher that we've seen him be. And to be honest with you, before the White Sox let him go last year and moved him to the Angels, he was pitching at a 3.79 ERA and 21 starts for them. It's hard to adjust somewhere on the fly. He didn't do it with the Angels. He didn't do it with Cleveland. So Giolito would be the pivot for me in terms of the rotation, a rotation that needs help right now. Let's be honest here. Senga's the front man. We like Quintana. We think Severino could have a bounce back. You added depth this week in Hauser that you would really like as a sixth man or maybe a number 5. But this rotation needs another arm or two. Like you said, this bullpen needs help. The thing is, if I'm the Mets and I'm Stearns, I'm looking around and saying, who wants to reestablish themselves for the long term on a 1-year deal, but also has the leverage that they cost a lot of money, and a lot of teams aren't willing to go there? Because my thought process is, Joe, as I've said many times, I don't care about the cash in year 1. And I don't think any Mets fan does. It has no long-term ramifications on the team. It's strictly Steve Cohen's money. And then number 2, this goes one of 2 ways. The 1-year flyer, whoever it may be, we can go in, and we don't know who's willing to do that, right? Like Giolito might want 3 years and might be content with the lower AAV. Soler probably wants 3 years. Would JD Martinez, Justin Turner, Rhys Hoskins might want to establish himself. Who wants the 1-year deal? But they either work out, and it was great, and then you could figure this out again next offseason because you were able to make a wild card or whatever it may be. Or your team doesn't really work out, but you can move those guys at the deadline and get prospects again because you're just paying for them. That's it. You didn't trade for them. You don't have any long-term money that you need to get off the books with them. They're just trade chips. That's what they are. And if one of the guys really bottoms out, you missed. Who cares? But you tried. You didn't go into next year just saying, man, I hope things just go differently for us. That's not how it goes right now. So that's what I'm very fixated on with this Mets team right now is they had a lot of money put aside for Yoshinobu Yamamoto. And they're not going to go pay somebody $325 million over the next 12 years. I can guarantee you that's not happening this year. And nor should it. There's nobody left that should be paid that, barring that they make some wild trade that we couldn't see coming. But the cash you had planned to use this year, there are guys out there that can help this team. And it doesn't always have to be a 1-year deal. We've talked about Soler a lot. The Mets need a DH. And the Mets, realistically, when you're honest with yourself, don't have that coming down the pipeline within the next 2 years, in my opinion. I'd love Vientos to be that guy. I'd love Beatty's bat to heat up, and he's also going to play a lot of third base because Ronnie Mauricio is out for the year, and maybe they go get Justin Turner, but Beatty's still going to get that chance to hold down third base. But there's not some bopper in this lineup right now for the next 2 years that is going to be, literally written in the DH spot every day, and you feel like you're going to get an 800 plus OPS out of him. Pete Alonso's playing first base. I don't think Pete Alonso's going anywhere in the near future. So that's where I'm at with this offseason, Joe. I still think they're going to be active, and maybe we're just trying. I don't think we're trying to just cheer people up. I just think that, well, you understandably should all be disappointed about the loss of Yamamoto. In this playoff climate where so many teams get in and you just got to get hot and you need to tweak a few different things and you need a couple guys in your rotation to stay healthy, the Mets 2024 season is not a lost season right now.
I think largely people look at it as you're either all in or you're punting, as if there is not this massive middle ground between those things. And I totally agree with everything you said, Connor. And when you think of a Jorge Soler, he might take 3 years, but do you think the Mets may have wished that they gave Kyle Schwarber 4 years instead of freaking out about his defense? The Phillies, who have made it to the NLCS and World Series and all this, they didn't care that Kyle Schwarber trotted around in left field kind of hilariously. He was largely a DH, but whatever, you sacrifice the defense on occasion. Jorge Soler, I think, is the type of guy that he's young enough that if you were to commit 3 years to him, and maybe that's not exactly what they want to do, but this could be 35 home runs a year at the designated hitter position, and he could stand in the outfield. It's not something he's incapable of doing. He's not a good defensive outfielder, but if you need him to play right field for a day or left field for a day, odds are you're not going to lose the game because Jorge Soler's in the outfield. So I do think there could be maybe a little flexibility, but I think to your point, overall, largely this should be looked at as how can we give 2024 a shot without messing with the payroll of 25, 26, 27, because when you look at 2025 right now, they might have $140 million committed is kind of where they're projected at right now. So that leaves a lot of wiggle room. And I don't think David Stearns is going to be overly interested in, chopping too much into that, because if they're going to go kind of non-aggressive this offseason and just adequately fill all the holes with legitimate major league players, then next year I can't even imagine how many emergency podcasts we're going to have, because boy, they're going to be itching for that big fish, and the young players will have, made their debuts. Think about the young pitchers with Vassell and all of them. They can make their debuts. We've talked about Acuna. We've talked about Drew Gilbert. So let's not completely lose our mind. A disappointing day, but the Mets are still going to attempt to field a competitive team, and they're just not going to let that ruin their long-term visions here.
All right, you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Joe, before we get out of here, let's dive into a mailbag question. I want to go through your mentions, actually, and see. There are so many questions that I don't even want to just pick one out, because they're all really what's next? I want to know, what do you think is the number one thing the Mets fan wants addressed right now? Because everybody's what's the pivot from here? Do we just save all our chips and wait for next year with Soto? Do you think a Pete Alonso extension right now becomes even more magnified because it's not necessarily PR with the Mets, but you'd like to limit your problems going into the long-term future, and that's one that seems that you'd like to solve before spring training? So rather than a mailbag that is a lot of the same, what is really your number one thing in feeling the pulse of the fan base?
I think an Alonso extension's certainly up there. I got quite a few mentions of folks saying, you didn't spend this money now, give us something. Give Mets fans something. And that something could be a Pete Alonso extension, which it doesn't necessarily improve the win total of the 2024 Mets, but it is something that I think Mets fans would be happy to have the comfort of not having to deal with us having conversations about it this time next year about where is Pete Alonso signing? Is he signing back with the Mets? Also, of course, everyone's going to pick apart the rotation, and that is evident that Mets fans, frankly, are not content with lower level starting pitching signings. I get it, but that's where the market's at, and I think you're going to see the Mets be pragmatic and selective on how they spend that money. It might be a lot in the short term, like you said, Connor, but I think they're going to selectively do so.
This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV. From inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. Just a quick programming note. Joe and I are planning to take next week off. So it'll be the 1 week of the year, literally the 1 week of the year with no new episode of the Mets Pod. Of course, if big enough news goes down, the Mets Pod bat signal can go up and we could show up. If they do something crazy, we're not going to be here for you. We're just thinking with the holidays, maybe it'll be a mild-mannered week. We'll see. We'll see right after the new year for what should be a very busy rest of the offseason for the Mets. There is a lot of offseason left for the Mets. Just because they didn't get Yamamoto doesn't mean the moves will completely halt. Once again, please visit sportspodcastawards.com and drop us some votes for best in baseball and best team podcast. It's all Joe and I want from Santa. Reminder, subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast. Thanks so much, everybody. Stay positive. I promise there's good news ahead. We'll catch you in 2 weeks.